Okay, good evening everybody and welcome to this evening's executive meeting. I'll start off by asking for apologies, and I've got two apologies of the members of the executive who can't be here this evening. That's Councillor Morse and Councillor Wright. We've also got apologies from two of the leaders who can't be here this evening, the co-leaders of the Progressive Group, which is Councillor Diana Moore and Kevin Mitchell. Good. Item 2 is to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st. You all agreed I'll sign those? All agreed? I'll take that as an acceptance, thank you. Item 3, that's the declarations of interest. I'll ask members to please declare appropriately. On item 4, we do have one item at the end, which is item 17, the Guildhall Shopping Centre, which will be a part 2. And just before we go into part 2, I will seek the appropriate recommendation and resolution to be moved to put us into part 2. There are no questions from the public under standing order number 19, and I'm going to change the batting order to bring forward to the next item, which is item 14. We will then bring forward item 11, which is the allocation of the one-off net zero, which I think David's team will be doing, and also followed by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund 12, and then obviously to get Matt Downing underway, we'll bring you up to that stage. Well, by the time we got there, Matt, it most probably would have been the number you would have been at anyway. But we'll try to, at least we're thinking about you. And so I'll then go into, first of all, item 14, which is the proposed changes for the re-procurement of homelessness and key rough sleeping services. Just give me that moment to get to my manual copy. And here we are, which it is agenda 14, which has been brought forward. There are two recommendations, and I will ask Councillor Pearce to read the recommendations, and then I will ask the team to come in. Councillor Pearce.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the two recommendations. First one is that Exeter City Council undertakes a procurement process compliant with the provisions of the Council's procurement and contract procedures and the Public Contracts Regulations 2015 in order to identify a provider to deliver a remodelled homelessness and rough sleeping service. The second recommendation is that the Council enters into a contract with a successful tenderer.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Richard, I think you're going to introduce this item for us, if you'd like to tell us briefly what it's all about.
Thank you, Chair. So ostensibly it is a remodelling of current services. There are existing provision. There are 3 services: the Homeless Outreach Team, Housing First Service, which is an accommodation and support service, and what's the third service? Navigator, thank you very much. So the Navigator service, which is a multi-agency, multidisciplinary support team. They're all operating in the field as current, so that the key question would be what difference will it make? It's effectively merging the teams under either one provider or a consortium approach, and it is enabling the different members of staff to wear different hats at different times so that they can take on different functions across each of those services. So for example, at the moment, our outreach service will do what it says on the tin, which is outreach work, going out 3 times a week on early morning and evening outreach to make contact with rough sleepers and do the necessary welfare checks and referrals to services. They will also then pick up all associated work during the day. What they won't do is type of work that the Housing First service will do, is visiting people in their Housing First homes and giving them intensive support. Equally, the Navigator team primarily brokers clients into statutory services where the accessibility is a challenge for clients due to various support needs and other reasons. And also the Navigators provide longer term support, So rather than short-term interventions, they will typically work with a client for 6 months or more. So the opportunity is that we share a lot of those responsibilities across a joined up service, and we also have an opportunity to extend that service by adding in some additional contracts, which we haven't specified here because they're still optional, and we're considering whether to bring them in, and we may introduce them at a later date if the tender is successful.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Any contributions? Councillor Jobson, do you want to come in at the stage? Okay, I'll throw this open now to the floor, and I've got Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this recommendation. As the previous portfolio holder, I have to say how impressed I've been with the staff that I've met working as part of the assertiveness outreach team and the navigators. They're extremely knowledgeable, very experienced, know many of the clients very, very well indeed, and I think that this, having them working more flexibly across the 3 different areas, can only improve what we're already doing. So well done to Richard and the team for coming up with this proposal. It's great stuff, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody else? No? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a couple of points I'd like to make on this, really. And the first one is just to commend the team, really, for showing once again how successful they can be in securing funding from the government. It's kind of bittersweet, though, really, because I know that as we've been so successful with our bid, that the competitive processes that have been set up by this government means that, yes, we win here in Exeter, but somebody else has lost in order for us to get this funding. So although it's great that we've managed to get it, our country deserves better, really, than this situation we're all being put in, where we're having to fight for every penny when it should be being distributed more evenly across the country to areas of need, not just where we're fortunate enough to have an incredibly skilled team who can write bids and deliver on them, and that's been proved time and time again, but sadly other areas don't have the same. This is going to be a really important piece of the jigsaw to solving our homelessness crisis that we've got here in the city. The rough sleeping is one part of it, and this is going to go a long way to kind of hopefully alleviating a lot of the challenges that we face in the city. It's going to be, as I say, one piece of the jigsaw, working with lots of other partners in the community and voluntary sector, be that the YMCA project, that Exeter Community Football Trust. There's lots of really good partners out there for us to work with. So just really, really pleased that we're going to be able to keep moving forward and address some of the challenges that we've got here in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. So there are 2 recommendations. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wood, second?
Yeah.
I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair, in favour of recommendations.
Thank you. We now go on to item 7, which is item 11 in your pack, which is the allocation of the one-off net zero budget. These are your recommendations. Councillor Wood, if you can read us your recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations are that the Executive recommends to the Council approves the allocation of £1 million earmarked reserves to support the delivery of net zero for the City Council and the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan covering the next 4 years. Of the £1 million earmarked reserve, 800,000 is allocated to delivering net zero for the City Council, and 200,000 is allocated to the delivery of the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan. An additional 50,000 from the underspend supplementary budget in 2021-22 is allocated to support the delivery of the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. And I see we've got Victoria. You're going to talk us into this one, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wood and Chair. So Councillor Wood has just highlighted the recommendations. So this report covers the one-off budget from earmarked reserves, which was £1 million, and we're planning to spend that over the next 4 years, which includes this financial year. Just to kind of highlight, all activity through this budget will be procured through our City Council's procurement and contract procedures policy. And for City Council Net Zero, so this is just to clarify, this is for Exeter City Council and delivering Net Zero. So we've appointed 2 temporary team members, and I think this was discussed at Strategic Scrutiny recently. They are in post for the next 4 years, and that's to support the activity and delivering City Council Net Zero. So we have 4 officers within the Net Zero team, but also myself and our City Inclusivity Officer, and we are there to support the Net Zero team in delivering Net Zero for the City Council. Section 8.2, it highlights services the whole team covers, so we can be proactive in a number of areas, not just within Net Zero. We've developed a Net Zero risk register for the City Council, and this is due to be presented at Audit and Governance later this month. This is going to be a live document that we add to on a regular basis, and this will be further developed because we just recently received our carbon reduction report from let me just get this word correct, the Centre for Energy and Environment from the University of Exeter. And from this, we'll be writing an action plan, and that will be the team's work programme for the foreseeable future. These documents are being presented at Strategic Scrutiny in September, along with Executive and Council this November. 9.2 gives you an indication of what the temporary budget will be allocated to for the next 4 years. As I mentioned, the action plan is about delivering budget or delivering Net Zero for the City Council. 9.4 is it gives you an idea of flavour of financial activity for this financial year. It's about relaunching the Green Accord, which is our green accreditation scheme to improve our supply chain and to reduce our Scope 3 emissions. It's looking at decarbonisation of our high use sites such as RAM and our leisure sites. Bringing on scale our large-scale ERDF project down on Water Lane, which is a big solar array, adding solar to the riverside roof. We have a number of batteries that we're adding to existing solar sites across the city, so that's quite a large-scale ERDF project that the team is leading on. We're also bringing together our Net Zero ambassadors to reduce carbon emissions within our individual service area. That is about changing behaviour with officers. It's going to be a big programme of work that we need to undertake with that. It's around sustainable travel, smarter working, and how do we reduce waste as a City Council. We are undertaking carbon literacy training for the team, and that will be rolled out further with elected members, the Net Zero ambassadors, and officers across the City Council. It's not just to say that we have this money and we're going to deliver Net Zero for the City Council with the funding that we've got. We're always looking out for additional funding, and we've got a number of expressions of interest to funding organisations. That tends to be central government. We've got one in place related around EV charging infrastructure funds. So it's about how do we use our existing assets to deliver Net Zero. And to support the delivery of the Net Zero Exeter 2030 plan, the table also highlights an overview activity for this financial year. Any questions?
Thank you, Victoria. Before I go to questions, Councillor Jobson. Okay, thank you. Any contributions or questions on the report, please? Councillor Delling.
It's just an add-on to the report, really. I think it's brilliant, fully support it, it's very good. But in other ways, I think the council are already doing this in the housing, in the HRA, with the retrofits and things like this, it's adding on to it. Okay, so I class this as enhancing what the council are doing rather than doing a project. Okay, I'd just like to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Delling. Anybody else on this? Councillor Pearce.
Pass the parcel there. So thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on one point that was just made there about the other funding streams that are being looked at. Later on today, we're going to come to a report in one of the other items which focuses on some of the challenges that there are in achieving net zero in 2030 across the city, and one of them is EV charge points. it later states that we need to be rolling out probably about 81 charge points a year to be anywhere near having the infrastructure to meet our targets. And there's been really, really well documented failings from Devon County Council recently, particularly in the city, with the charge point infrastructure that they've rolled out, currently ripping out, and then they're going to have to put some more in. So there's been huge waste involved in that exercise, and we know from that we cannot rely on them as the transport authority to deliver. We need to step in here. So it's really great to hear that that's a funding stream that's being looked at. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Okay, in the absence of anybody else, we've got those three recommendations. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to kind of emphasise some of what Victoria said. When we're looking at the net zero within the City Council, which is what this is about, I think it's important to note that some of the Scope 3 is picked up. Scope 3 carbon emissions is picked up within this work, because it's very easy to look at just exclusively what the council does, which is kind of like its vehicles and its buildings. Scope 3 is where we are also considering where the resources come from, what's the carbon emission further down the chain or further upstream. And so that's very important for me, because I feel we're doing a more robust job. And also looking at where I've been involved before within my past life is driving for equality within organisations and having ambassadors embedded within the different areas of the organisation is crucial to landing what are difficult achievements within teams. And I think having net zero ambassadors throughout the council will certainly help to bring the message home, because I think it's at the cliff face. What do they call it? At the coal face is where decisions can be made and where ideas can come forward that could really make a difference. And the other one was the Green Accord, and this is where, yes, we are looking at our own carbon footprint in terms of how we procure the services, how we buy things in. But that again drives that ripple effect out. If you want to be successful in bidding business to us, then you've got to have a green stream. You've got to be able to provide evidence that with the services or products we're going to buy from you have green credentials. So that is our buying power pushing out the green message. So I'm pleased to see those things in there, and definitely recommend this paper.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. And just before I go to the vote, also the carbon literacy training for the councillors will be very, very useful for us all. So there's three recommendations there. I'll move from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wood. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
Chair, unanimous, and the recommendations are carried.
Thank you. Now I want to go on to item 12, which is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the Exeter allocation. And again, there's 4 recommendations, 2.1, 2, 2.2s and a 2.3, and then there are some executive matters for us to note. I won't read these out in detail, as Victoria will explain them to us. Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. Could you put the presentation up? Thank you. Have we got the next slide? Thank you. So this report provides an overview of shared prosperity funding and how the City Council will manage and monitor our allocation. So shared prosperity, it's a central pillar of central government and it's part of the levelling up agenda. And the graphic here on the screen, it provides you with an overview of the purpose of shared prosperity, and it's building pride in place and increasing life chances. There's 3 investment priorities, which is community in place, supporting local business and people and skills. It has an overall mission, which is mission 9. I won't read all of these, they're on the screen. And so we need to develop our investment plan and our interventions, which relate directly to the overall objective and the investment priorities. So shared prosperity, it replaces previous European funding such as ERDF, ESIF funding that was spread across the UK. Exeter's, I'm going to call it SPF rather than shared prosperity, just kind of try and reduce that a little bit. So Exeter's SPF allocation is not a like-for-like replacement from previous European funding. We are receiving quite significantly less, and the last 3 projects that we had in Exeter to receive ERDF funding equates to over £7 million, and one of those was the Water Lane ERDF project that we are currently managing. So it kind of shows we're getting substantially less. Our allocation is 1.4 million, and I'll come on to it a little bit in the report as to where that will be spent. So the Department of Levelling Up Communities is leading on SPF, and they've issued a policy and frequently asked questions that we need to work to develop our investment plan and our interventions. It's myself leading on Shared Prosperity for Exeter, and this is a 3-year funding programme, and this is year 1, so kind of we're actually halfway through year 1, so you could kind of say it's a 2.25-year programme. And I'll be providing regular updates to strategic scrutiny to monitor progress, outputs and outcomes that we're looking to deliver for Exeter. I mentioned we have 1.4 million. We can start to spend now in this financial year, but that's at risk, and it's probably a risk that we're not willing to take at the moment. So once we have our investment plan signed off by the Department for Levelling Up and Communities, that's when we can start to spend against shared prosperity. Match funding isn't a requirement of shared prosperity. It's welcomed, but it's not a requirement, so we don't really need to source that to deliver projects. I've recently received our annual breakdown. This will be in the minutes, but just to give you an idea of this financial year, it's 170,000. Next financial year is 340,000, and the final year, which is 2024-25, is 892,000. We have a minimum spend on capital each year, so we can increase capital, but there is a minimum spend for capital each year. We can use 4% of our SPF allocation towards project administration, project managing, and kind of overseeing it. That equates to 56,000, and we're looking to appoint a project manager to undertake that work for us. We also received £20,000 to support the writing of our investment plan, and this is a document that we need to submit by the 1st of August. It's very much a high-level document. We don't need to detail every intervention, every output that we want to deliver in Exeter. The investment plan needs to be signed off by the leader, the chief executive, and our section 151 officer, as well as having consensus from our local partnership group. I mentioned the 1st of August deadline. We need to put together a programme of interventions that we want to deliver in Exeter. These will be assessed after the submission date, so we've kind of got some flex around those dates. So those are the overall aims of shared prosperity. So again, really focusing on building pride in place and supporting levelling up. So I mentioned the 3 themes. The investment plan wants an idea of what our city challenges are that we want to address for shared prosperity. And so looking at it for communities in place, we have some themes that we're looking at. We need to gather lots of data and evidence to support these challenges as the ones that we want to focus on for the city. So issues around city centre antisocial behaviour, how do we improve access and use of our green spaces within the city centre. We have a programme in Exeter that's supporting the local delivery pilot around health and wellbeing. How do we support that through shared prosperity? How do we improve access to culture and heritage within the city? What's been the impact of COVID on the city centre over the last couple of years, related around footfall, the issues around cost of living, energy prices, how is that affecting our business community and our residents, issues around cross-city traffic, and the challenge around delivering net zero. So communities and place ideas. We have a list of ideas around solving those challenges. As I mentioned, we have 1.4 million allocated to us as Exeter, but all of these ideas I'll talk about equate to more than 1.4 million. So we have a challenge to reduce those down for Exeter. So how do we improve our CCTV network with replacing the old, very old cameras across the city? How do we improve access to our city centre green spaces and link that to health and well-being? Driving footfall to our city centre, how do we have energy advisors going into our residents and our businesses to support them to reduce their energy prices, but actually how do we support them to reduce carbon emissions for their homes and their businesses? How do we look at transport within the city, so looking around transport circulation across Exeter? Again, linking around net zero is, well, actually, what could we do in Exeter to develop a carbon offset programme, looking at it in an urban environment, which would be a challenge, an interesting project, but also looking at creative arc as well. So the links that we have with the university, how could we implement creative arc through shared prosperity? And supporting local businesses. The challenges that we're seeing in the city is that 3-year business survival rate in Exeter is below the Devon average and below the national average. How do we develop programmes to support businesses to make sure they survive past the 3-year rate? We've talked around recruitment and retention challenges across the city. Again, how do we develop programmes to support businesses to retain staff and actually also to attract staff? City's moving towards full employment again. Again, that is the issue around recruitment and retention, and also around the vacancy rates that we have in the city. It's we have lots of vacancies, but we don't have the people to fill them. And from speaking with business membership organisations such as the Chamber, the In Exeter and the FSB, businesses are wanting to make carbon reduction measures to their business, but they're unclear as to how to do it. They want that independent advice as to how to implement that. And then also around research and development within our institutions, whether that be the Met Office or the university, how do we commercialise that in the city, but also have impact in Exeter? And supporting local business, these are the ideas as to how we can resolve some of those challenges. So develops business support programmes, have energy and carbon reduction advice, peer mentoring around recruitment and retention, so learning best practice from each other. How do we support the greening of our business and looking around innovation within the city? And the final intervention is around people and skills. So we had the great resignation over the pandemic, lots of people leaving their jobs for a number of reasons. We have a cohort of people that are aged over 50 that have left their employment. It's about how do we support those either into training or into work, reskilling, upskilling. Mentioned we've got high levels of job vacancies within the city. How do we support businesses to fill those vacancies? The retention of young people in our cities, whether that be graduates or young people leaving the city, how do we encourage and support them to stay in Exeter? Raising aspirations is an area that we're wanting to look at. So again, for those young people who live in Exeter, how do we get them to get the best opportunities from Exeter? Life skills is something that we've talked about through the Exeter Skills Strategy. It's not just about a qualification. It's about talking within groups. It's a whole range of skills. It's not just about qualifications. Mentioned upskilling and reskilling, but also how do we support those furthest from the jobs market, and how do we support people to access employment sites across the city? So it's not just getting there by car, but some people just can't afford to have a car. How do we support those? So it's proposed to establish a shared prosperity working group, and they will have oversight and monitoring of the projects, the interventions, the outputs and the outcomes of shared prosperity. And this is going to mainly consist of relevant City Council officers and directors, as well as legal and finance. We've contacted the Chamber and in Exeter to have representation on this working group, and they're more there because they're business representative. The value of the interventions proposed, as I mentioned, is over our 1.4 million allocation. So we need to develop a mechanism to assess those applications. So I'm in discussions with our procurement team to develop an application form that either officers or businesses, organisations that need to complete to make sure it links to the outputs and outcomes of shared prosperity, but also how does it link to our vision as a city and our corporate plan. And they will be assessed as to who receives funding going forward. The policy for shared prosperity is a really big emphasis on consultation with our business community on our city challenges. I've had 3 online sessions based around those 3 investment priorities, around communities in place, business support, people and skills. The policy talks around if there's a business group already in place, then they recommend to use this business group to consult with to gain local insight in city challenges. And we're recommending we use the Livable Exeter Place Board as that mechanism for local insight to what's happening in the city. And I'm presenting at the next Livable Exeter Place Board on SPF to gain that consensus on city challenges, pretty much what I've presented tonight. I'm also currently writing copy for the City Council website, again, just to make sure that if there's a group within the city that is wanting to access funding, that they've got the opportunity to access funding. Guidance is due out this summer from the Department for Level Up and Culture around monitoring, evaluation and subsidy control. So just waiting on that because that may change some of the ideas around interventions and the investment plan going forward. Any questions?
Thank you, Victoria. And of course, the report on 174 says an update report will go to scrutiny committee on the 22nd of September, which is very important to make sure that everybody can have a look and scrutinise. Councillor Jobson, you want to say no? Okay. Anybody else want to comment on this? Councillor Wood.
Very popular microphone, this, it works. Just reading through this, and I was speaking to Victoria before this meeting, going through the detail in this, and it's really good. I mean, the title is Building Pride and Place in Increasing Life Chances. I mean, that's something that's very dear to this council, and it's a great example actually when you look through the sort of things that have been put in to respond to this opportunity. It's building on our place-based community development approach, something that we put a lot of work into. So when these ideas, and they are only ideas, these aren't the ways, still open to development. As Victoria has said, there's a finite amount of money here, but some great ideas. But it's all the way that we work, the way that the council has developed different projects means that we are able to take money like this and deliver real value for money and impact, because we know what we're doing. We've been working at this for some time. We've made the connections, we've made the partnerships, and we can deliver. But what I was really pleased to see is so many projects and ideas that are on the table at the moment look at reducing carbon emissions and increasing biodiversity, which of course is quite key to us reaching, as a city, reaching net zero 2030. So pleased to see that. Thank you very much.
Okay, just a remark, Victoria, the slides, can that be shared with the executive, please, and appended to the minutes? I think that's quite important. Is there anybody else want to make a contribution? If not, I'll just sum up by saying, if you looked at some of those mission statements, those are statements that we've got in various forms, or the words in various forms of many of our documents going forward, and I think that's very good about some of the missions and the ambitions, and I think it's well attuned to it all. Thanks for that work, Victoria. Again, 1.4 million. Let's see how much that can get. Let's see how far that goes. But who knows? There's other funding pots that we may be able to, but about having that vision, having that understanding is very, very important. And I like the consultation process, and as I said, it will come back to scrutiny for everybody to have a good look. So those are the 4 recommendations as detailed in points 1 to point 3. So all in favour, can I have a seconder for those recommendations for us?
Yeah.
Councillor Denning. Right, all in favour of the recommendations, please show.
Chair's unanimous, recommendations carried.
Thank you. And now we move on to item 13, which is Councillor Morse isn't here, so I'll just remind you of what these two recommendations and also what we're asked to note, that we adopt the local list and grants delegated authority to the Director for City Development to amend the local list from time to time to ensure that national requirements are kept up to date in accordance with any new planning legislation or amendments to existing legislation, and the technical guidance in section 4 of Appendix C remains up to date, and we're asked to note it as well. So at that point, Matthew, would you like to briefly talk us through? You don't need to go through every item, by the way, but what I would say, there is a question that's been submitted from Councillor Diana Moore. She's not here, unfortunately. She's given her apologies. She asked a question. That question will be sent to her in writing together with the answer and also appended to the minutes. So, Matt, if you would like to...
Thank you, Chair. In brief, the local validation list is a formal planning document that needs to be brought to Executive to be adopted. It will replace the existing validation documents on the Council's website, which were published in 2010-2011 and are now out of date. It will mean that we won't have to validate planning applications until we have all the information that we need to determine them. This should speed up and improve the quality of applications that we receive. We consulted on the draft local list for 6 weeks last year. The comments received are set out at Appendix B on pages 261 to 284. The final local list, having taken into account those comments, is at Appendix C on pages 285 to 352. As can be seen, the local list is split into two main parts: a series of tables setting out the information required for different types of applications and the circumstances when the information should be submitted, and guidance on the information, including links to further technical guidance and key contacts. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Has anybody got any points or contributions to make on this one? Councillor Johnson? No? Okay, I'll put the two recommendations for what we note to the vote. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Hussain. Let's keep Howard's hand different. Councillor Hussain. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And now we're going back to the agenda as they run in the morning paper, as they say. Item 6 on our agenda. And so, item 6, I will ask Councillor Wood to read his recommendations or run us through the recommendations, please. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Chair. There are 6 recommendations in total. I don't intend to read them all out, it's quite extensive, but they are on the board. But I do want to read out the first recommendation because I think it's quite important to highlight. So the recommendation is that the Executive acknowledge Net Zero Exeter 2030 requires a comprehensive and whole system approach to deliver, and no single organisation, including the Exeter City Council, can solve the challenge of a city reducing greenhouse gas emissions to zero, and that a timetable 20 years ahead of the national and county targets for net zero is very ambitious and requires place-based coordination and cross-institutional cooperation. In light of this, Executive welcomes the Exeter greenhouse gas emissions inventory and acknowledge that the pace and scale of change required to deliver on the Net Zero 2030 goal will require a step change in resources, activity and policy making both at a local and at a national level. And there are 5 more recommendations which are cycled through on the board up there.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wood, but thank you for also drawing our attention to the important one. I'm going to ask the Chief Executive and Growth Director, Karim Hassan, to talk us through this paper, which we know we spent a lot of time pulling together. Karim.
Am I in control now? No?
You're in control.
Okay. So I've got a presentation that I use for scrutiny, but I'm not going to take you through that because I spent an awful lot of time at scrutiny. And I spent a lot of my presentation addressing what Exeter City Futures have been doing. So I don't think I need to cover that. I want to focus in on the challenge around net zero and the recommendations and some of the thought processes that I think we need to think about in terms of addressing the challenge. I'm going to start with a quote, which is, I use this at scrutiny because I think it really does helpfully capture the quality that is needed of the public sector acting as a creative bureaucracy in addressing these wicked problems that all urban areas have and will be faced increasingly. And in the context of net zero, I think it's very apt. And to quote, it says, wicked problems are proliferating. These problems we must address even though we do not know the precise answer or roadmaps. This calls for foresight and the ability to relax into uncertainty or ambiguity as we invent the future. Stark and threatening choices face humanity, and although we know what a richer, sustainable life could be, our collective intelligence seems incapable of making it happen. Governments across all levels, especially through their convening power and in collaboration with others, are called upon to provide the guidance, roadmaps and programs that will anticipate and avert looming catastrophes, grow the quality of life, reduce inequalities and stimulate economies. Academics are very good at telling you the problem, but we need action, and it's a very different task. Intellectualizing about a problem and delivering very different disciplines. And what I was trying to do with the presentation is to address the fact that what we've invested in very heavily as a city is in creating a governance culture within the city that organizations have become increasingly comfortable with the fact that they are uncomfortable because these issues are often ambiguous and need some definition and need work to define the nature of the problem. And inherently, you take risks. And when you do some risks, you get battered and beaten up because everybody out there wants to address the fact that you failed. That's how they define it. But if you don't do things that are innovative and trying to solve a problem, you will not solve this problem. And that is the challenge for governments and the challenge for us in local government. Have you the leadership capacity to support people through a difficult journey where you are taking some measure of risk? And the reason why that recommendation 1 is critical is that recognizes this is not down to the City Council. City Council showed leadership, and I commend members. In 2019, before COVID hit, you took a decision and you said the City of Exeter declared a climate change and you're going to seek to address it. Though you don't have the levers because you're not responsible for transport, that's Devon County Council. You're not responsible for private sector housing stock, not in your gift to tell them that they've got to retrofit their property, but you want to show leadership. You don't have the resources. In fact, you've been saving money every year since the last 12 years of austerity, and you're doing that, continue to do that. At the same time, you haven't ducked the challenge. You said, we're going to do that, and we're going to find ways to make this happen. And there's not many local authorities that do that. So I think all credit to the organisation is setting up that level of leadership. So we didn't have a roadmap when we began the journey. We then produced a document, 2030 Net Zero, which showed a roadmap. But there's a big difference between a roadmap and an action plan that defines the resources, when and how you're going to do it. But if you go to the conclusion and you go to paragraph 8.41, it tells you what we've got to do. In very simple terms,
is a there's media at the back. If they're going to quote me, what we've got to do to get to net zero, it's in that paragraph. It's not rocket science. When we started, we didn't know how we were going to do it. But the greenhouse gas imagery tells you more or less what we've got to do. So the government says, 2050, we're going to be emitting 0 greenhouse gas emissions. We've said, because the science tells us, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in the next 10 years. This 10 years is critical. So in the next 10 years, as a city, we want to get to 0 greenhouse gas emissions, which is 20 years ahead of the national. And that means, first and foremost, the grid, which is being decarbonised all the time, has to be supported with additional renewable energies generated from this city. And we don't have lots of capacity to generate wind because of the nature of the city. So it's largely going to be photovoltaics, and it's going to be installations on roofs. And I'm going to come back at some point to the numbers, but by way of strategy, we've got to maximise the amount of roofs generating photovoltaics and big time commercial buildings. Then we have to reduce the energy demands of each house. We're going to reduce that, and at some point we're going to rip out all the gas boilers. And when I say at some point, within the next 10 years, that's what net zero says. And the carbon budget that we set nationally, which is the current one, is the 6th one for 2035, says a big contribution will be district heat networks, which is largely heat pumps. And it will be done on a district basis. So a combination of gas boilers coming out of houses and replaced with air heat systems or district air heat systems. And at the moment we got about 400 air heat pumps, and it'll need to be 42,000 in the next 10 years, and 11,200 houses connected to district heat networks. That's what it looks like. And to do that, we've got to install solid wall insulation, and we've got to install cavity wall installation and up the level of cavity insulation. And the numbers will come precisely later on in the report. And then every one of us who drives a car goes to a filling station, loads up with petrol, diesel. Well, within the next 10 years, that's actually, I say 10 years, it's less than that, it's 9 years as of last year. 50,000 cars in the city, according to net zero, will need to be powered by electricity from the grid, which we said is going to be renewable. So currently we buy about 4,000 cars in the city every year. Every car has to be electric to get to there. All our fleet, likewise. So every institution and organisation in the city need to cooperate with doing the same thing. I know your eyes are tongue as I get to the point. I can see your eyes, you've already glazed over. So get to the point. We've got to up our recycling rates, and those are the ingredients of what net zero looks like. And any one of us who thinks that's an easy task, I think we just need to take stock. Because anybody who's seen what the government have tried to do with the Green Deal in getting individual households to take up all the insulation and everything else, and they failed twice at national level. And so as a city, we've got to do what the government failed to do, and you've got no control over over individual houses. You can sort out the HRing, as we're doing, and leading by example, yeah? But even our example, to get it to net zero by 2030, we have to ratchet up even more. The housing associations and private landlords, the government will sort them and get them to do, but the private houses need to be helped. And that means a financial mechanism for doing that, which I said the government failed to do, and that means and so the reason I'm labouring this point, because I have to live and breathe this on your behalf, and people make light of this, and I get a constant barrage of people asking questions about it, and it's the nature of the complexity of the task, which is massive. And that first recommendation highlights that. And unless we're prepared to collaborate and to go on the journey of innovation, we ain't going to solve that problem. And it's massive. So that's the first thing in terms of recommendation. I ain't not going to take you through all the detail, the actual numbers involved in the report. But the second recommendation is important, because what it's saying to members is, we recognise there's a step change in resources, and we don't have those resources within the organisation. So we need a different approach. And you've got a good record as a council in finding ways to do things when you have no right to assume you can do it. But because of the way you've worked, you've brought in investment from others and resources, and you do this all the time in property. You do JVs, joint ventures with the private sector to get developments built when we don't have the capacity and resources to do so. And Mike over there has done that on a number of times in the city, and he's delivered investment for you, and we've used our land in order to marry with finance that brings in the investment. So there's examples like that we've done. So what you're saying in here, go away, have a think, how might we find solutions to doing this in a way that's perhaps at the moment unsighted? What could we do? And also, this is what's happening in other cities. So Bristol has done this with electric vehicles, they've done their partnership, and many cities are doing on very specific interventions, and they're finding ways to get things done. So that's the second one. I need to bring to you a report with some options how we might supplement our resources by different means in order to achieve the outcomes that you've specified. And then the third thing is members have invited, you've engaged with scrutiny, and scrutiny have said to you they'd like to get involved and have a look at the practical implications, and they've mentioned green construction as one of it. So the Exeter College have set up a green construction group. They bring many private sector players together because they're mapping out the pipeline for the skills agenda for apprenticeships, so that construction firms know how to plan. And in a similar fashion, there are a number of things that scrutiny could have a look at what we could do to support our partners in supporting us in the supply chain. And then the third recommendation is, we know that offsetting our carbon emissions by investing in what they call offsetting or carbon sequestration is a valid part of the net zero agenda. And there are within Devon already initiatives underway, like the North Devon Biosphere, but in Bristol they've done it, where land estates have been identified, where development is funding carbon sequestration, planting trees on a massive scale. And you need, I think, to have the confidence to know that if you get investment for this kind of thing, that it delivers for you the savings that you require. And we're inviting scrutiny to have a look at the estates, the examples in Devon and elsewhere, and to come back to you as to a credible approach. And then you've got then the reference to Councillor Zion Lights, who's now a director on the Exeter City Futures board. And that's it.
Thank you, Kareem. This is a detailed report. For those of us who attended scrutiny, we've heard some questions and a lot of issues and the contributions made. I have had some written questions from Councillor Moore, who, as I mentioned earlier, is unable to attend this evening, and she will have those questions in writing to her, and they'll be appended to the minutes. But I've got some questions here from Councillor Jobson, so if you'd like to ask them, not in the form of a question, but within your contribution, you're allowed to speak. And if you want to ask questions as you are speaking, please feel free to do so. But I'm right in saying there's nothing in the Constitution which says there are any supplementary to any questions you may ask in your contributions. But I'll try and be as helpful as possible, Councillor Jobson. So if you'd like to make your contribution now, please incorporate in your questions.
Thank you, Councillor Barlick. I'm pleased to hear that much of this is going to come to scrutiny, whether it's combined or strategic. I think that will be most helpful. But there were some specific things that really as questions, and that is 2.2 on page 11. We're going to, or the executive is intending to invite Exeter City Futures to reflect on the challenges. I just wondered if there was a timeline for that, and I am assuming from what the Chief Executive said that any reflections will be placed before scrutiny committee before they come to Executive and full council. So that was the first thing. The one thing that worries me about all of this is we all know exactly how much all this is going to cost the average residential household. And as the Chief Executive has said, I mean, you can't compel a household to do anything. Some may have the money and be willing to spend it. Some may have the money and be not willing to spend it. But most probably won't have sufficient money to both go to heat pumps or to go onto a system and to buy an electric car, because by my calculation, while electric vehicles remain stubbornly high in price, you're probably talking about a family spending £50,000 or thereabouts, perhaps a little less, perhaps a little more, over the next 7.5, 8 years effectively, which is a great deal of money to find. Whilst there are grants and that available, they are rightly triggered at homes or households that are more vulnerable and don't have the resources at all. So it's going to be the great sort of mass of the British taxpayer who's going to have to find this, and I am hoping that included among the practical challenges that are referred to paragraph 2.4 on page 12, that there is going to be a table setting out the sort of costs that the average household is going to have to think about. I think a lot of them will be willing to think about it, but they don't want to get to 2029 and then suddenly discover they've got 50,000 quid to find and no mortgage raising capacity. And for a lot of older people who wouldn't be able to take out loans because of age and that, they are going to find it more tricky, but they may not be financially vulnerable. So that was that issue. And then the other one that bothers me a bit, as people know from what I've said at previous meetings, we talk an awful lot about these low car neighbourhoods, which in principle sounds extremely attractive, but a great many people need a car, not because they want to drive to work, which is only within 15 minutes walk, or take the children to school, but because they've got an elderly relation that they have to get out miles away 3 or 4 times a week, and that's the only way they can do it. And what worries me is if we concentrate too much on having too many developments in the city centre that don't provide for somewhere for people to park their vehicles, don't want to encourage them to use them, but to park them, that they may then choose to move to the suburbs or move to the outskirts of Exeter, and will then start driving in because it's easier to do that. And I just wondered if any research has been undertaken, or if there are any plans to undertake any research as to how to prevent that sort of leaching of people outside of Exeter who don't want to live in a no-car development in Exeter because they need a car. And if no such research has been undertaken, may I suggest that it is as a matter of urgency, because we haven't got very long to deal with all this. So those were my thoughts. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jobson. I thought I was hearing a conversation between you and your MP, Simon Jupp, for a moment. But yeah, there's a lot of points you've raised, and I do understand them. Whereas I want the executive to reflect on any contribution you make, because we have to make some recommendations on all of this. You asked some specific things. Can we advise you on the timeline? Well, the intention, don't hold a stick to us or anything. The intention is round about the autumn to get these things done. And we do have a intention to report to scrutiny. Okay, we will do. So detailed questions, a good place to be is within scrutiny. You asked me to confirm that among the practical challenges, but about the average residential household will be included. Well, of course, as you're aware, we've got the cost of living crisis. We're all suffering increases at the moment. You talk about cars. Well, a good bus service would be a good thing to help us to go that way. And you would have seen an email from me today asking the county council to step up to their responsibility for funding public transport, and in particular late night and night services, to ensure that people are safe, particularly women and girls at night of a weekend are safe. So we're asking them to step up, but there is no assumption that the cost of transition to net zero will be funded by the council taxpayer. Absolutely not. And the scale of funding is likely to be well beyond the scope of the normal tax council funding. Government attended COP26 in Glasgow, signed up to it, and they were applauded for doing all that. We're still waiting, and I'm glad that the local government association, all parties, are pressing government to actually say, if you want us to do something, are you going to help us fund that work towards it? You've asked stuff about the cost of EV batteries, or have we done any assessment as to whether people can afford the switch? No, we haven't. And you then go on to talk about multiple reasons that do they need the car. The answer is no to that as well. And then you talk about a lot of other things. Of course, the Transport Authority strategy for Exeter, which is Devon, is for 50% of all journeys within the city to be active travel. And what this report is doing is just simply communicating the scale of the challenge. So there are a lot of decisions, and I think this is what the Chief Executive, and we've allocated resources to this. We've asked, Council asked the Chief Executive to deal with this as a priority, because we declared a climate emergency as a priority, to allocate some of his time for that. And there are big strategic things that we've got to look at. And our challenge will be, as the report tells us, is to actually get our other partners in the city on side. We, and Councillor Wood will speak to this in a moment, we will be doing everything we possibly can to ensure that the City Council does its bit of what we're in control of, okay, to get ourselves there. And I can assure you, through the channels we have with our partners in the city, we are working hard to get them to come with us. It's unfortunate that our friends on the County Council decided to go to 2050. You know, already they've given up. They've given up. Put it off to another time. Put it off to another authority maybe in a few years' time. We're still holding our foot on that pedal at this moment in time, and we intend to do that. So I hope that's answered your contribution, Councillor. I'm going to now throw it open, and I'll come back to Councillor Wood at the end. Sorry I went on a bit, but this is an important item. As you quite rightly know, and I know it's before your time, Councillor Jobson, we declared a climate emergency, and so therefore it is an emergency thing that we need to deal with. Okay, can I open it up here to the rest of the executive? Anybody else want to come in? Councillor Williams and then Councillor Gussain.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to comment on the issue of having access to cars. Exeter is very fortunate in having co-cars, which is a car share scheme, and I think for many families and many people in Exeter, we're changing the way that we actually look at having ownership of a car. I'm certainly not going to be replacing my car when it dies. I shouldn't be participating in the co-car scheme. So I think that we're very, very fortunate that we have got such a scheme, and I'm sure more and more people will be signing up for that sort of car share scheme in the future. I did want to come and make a comment on something that Kareem said, which he said about increasing recycling rates. And certainly in Exeter we are well on track to be doing that in rolling out food waste collection. I think the other thing, the really positive thing for Exeter as well, is that we have a very, very low rate of waste collection from households. We're far lower than the Devon. Devon set a target of 416 kilograms per head per annum, and we're already down at 296, so it's absolutely fantastic. But we're not sitting on our laurels, we're going to be reducing that even further. I think there is one thing that we do need to be doing, and I'm sure we've got that planned as well, but it's actually setting up a partnership with the residents of Exeter, with the public. So for example, I went out on a black bin collection round on Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock, 4-hour shift. I only did half a shift. The rest of the loaders do 8 hours. Very tough work. But one of the things I noticed is we had to collect some what was supposed to be recycling waste because it had been contaminated. So I think that there is quite a bit of that going on, and so we need to be doing more with the public to help them differentiate what needs to go into their recycling bins. There's still a lot of education and work to be doing, but certainly on the waste side of things, we are heading in the right direction, very much so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, and you're right at every opportunity to remind us of the situation with regard to recycling. Is there anybody else? Councillor Gusay wanted to come in.
Well, I just wanted to point to about the report. It's absolutely excellent. It's the first time I see such detailed report specifically for Exeter, about the situation in Exeter, the details that is in the report, and the task ahead. And now you look at the figures and you know what you're supposed to do in every category, in every one of these sections that are the 8 sections that are in front of us. So I'm really, really pleased to see that report. Now we've got something solid to talk about and do, and an action plan to carry through, because we've got these targets, these figures. It's clear, it's black and white, so we know. So I'm just gonna say I must be very pleased to see this report, and for me, I know the enormity of the task ahead of us. But yeah, thank you very much.
Councillor Denning.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on what Kareem said about the homes, the retrofit that we're doing as well, which obviously carbon, and it's all helping to meet net 2030. And the more we're doing, we had a brilliant meeting today with the retrofit programme. We're actually expanding what we're doing, looking for more funds. But the thing that really came to me was that some people really didn't want to have it done, and the way that we're overcoming it, and I know, I've been doing whatever, is having some champions telling people how good it is to have this done. And perhaps that's something we could do within that project of engagement, because that's really important, isn't it? So now those people are quite happy, they understand it's a good thing, so it's about explanation. So perhaps that could be taken into private households as well. Good news stories, perhaps, that's what we could call it. So I think that might as well be a help in the project.
Thank you, Councillor Denning, and I feel sure Victoria will pick that up in relation to the ambassadors and the UK Prosperity Fund. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Chair. It's the most popular one, this. It works, doesn't it? So just one quick point, and I think it's really a great illustration that slide is the one that's been left up on the screen behind us, because it's huge. The scale of the task, absolutely enormous, and it could be quite overwhelming if we just looked at those numbers, because you look at transport, well, that's not our responsibility. Buildings, yes, some of it is the HRA, and as Councillor Denning was just explaining to us all, and Kareem mentioned in his presentation, we're actually doing all we need to do on that. We're across it, but that's actually such a small percentage of the buildings in the city. So there's lots and lots of things that are kind of outside of our control, but that's not to say we should shy away from it. We need to show leadership. We need to demonstrate to the rest of the city, the rest of the country, that it can be done. We need to be ambitious. So I just think really everybody who's involved in this project should be commended for not looking at that and running away, but actually running towards it and saying, look, this is how we can do it. There's a model here that can be done. Particularly focusing back on that transport, because cars need to change. We accept that now. That seems to be the strategy, the direction of travel that the government is taking us all in, transitioning from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. There's huge infrastructure costs that are associated with that, but it doesn't solve one of the other challenges that we've got here in the city, which is congestion. So we need to focus on what Councillor Williams was saying there about co-cars and car clubs, because depending on which piece of research and information you look at, one car club vehicle either takes 6 or 8 private vehicles off the road. So either one of those, that's a pretty impressive gain. So if you're talking about a development of 300 houses, you probably only need 20 or 30 parking spaces for car clubs. And then there's no need for anybody to have a vehicle in there, particularly people who only use a vehicle 2 or 3 times a week for visiting people outside of the area. They're not having to spend out huge capital sums that they probably can't afford, the way the cost of living crisis is starting to bite in this nation. So they're not having capital assets sat outside there. It's just really, really good to see that we're taking action and being bold, because we need to, otherwise we're going to be in a difficult situation as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Chair. There is so much in this report. It's a massive piece of work, and as Amal has said, it's really refreshing to see this level of detail, to actually be able to get your head around, or try to, the nature and the scale of this issue. It's a city-wide challenge, and we have stepped up to it as a city council. We have stepped up to push this agenda forward. It's not our agenda, but we believe in the place, we believe in the city, and we have stepped up to this mark. We are pushing it forward. There are massive challenges across so many areas, and those sectors that are on the board up there give you some idea about what we're talking about. Within that is a huge number of stakeholders. And that includes residents, and all these stakeholders have got unique situations and unique elements to how they live. So if we're talking about buildings, the house that I live in, the issues around how I can make that more efficient, how I can generate power from the PV. I have a roof, I have PV on the roof, it just so happens, but how I live is different to how Councillor Pearce lives. He lives in a different building. His challenges will be different, and that goes right across all of our residents. And then we talk about commercial buildings. I mean, it's just massive. So when we kind of look at this issue, one of the things we hear a lot about is recycling, which is an appropriate focus. Let's face it, it is an appropriate focus. But when you look at that graph, it's 7% of carbon emissions. Not that graph, the one before it. It's 7% of emissions. So it's not the whole of that 7% that relates to recycling. So recycling, I get it, I'm engaged with it fully, it's an agenda that I'm fully behind. But one of the things we hear a lot about is recycling, and it's less than 7% of the emissions. The largest slice up there, the orange one, 35%, that's buildings. And as I said, we've got residential, we've got commercial, each business is unique. The building is used, this building is unique. Loads of solar panels on the roof. There isn't much that the City Council doesn't own that isn't covered in solar panels. But that's an achievement from another time. So you've got the complexity, and addressing those shouldn't be underestimated. It is huge. The second slice we've got is power, which is 24%. Now we're already, as I say, solar panels on our roofs. Solar farm going to be open soon by Victoria's team. The Riverside Leisure Centre had a bit of a dodgy roof, as buildings of that age have. The roof is being repaired, but in repairing it, we're also covering it with a solar array. So we're taking every opportunity we can to generate green power. And the third is transport, and we've heard a lot about that transport. It's 22% of the pie, a huge thing to try and grapple with. There's so many of us have different ways of getting around the city, so many different needs as to, from the transport that we need. But I think Councillor Pearce has very eloquently put how we can think in a different way. We may still need a car. It doesn't need to be our car. We need access to a vehicle. And then the investment cost of turning it into an electric vehicle, into a sustainable green solution, is shared by all those that use that vehicle. So I think I'll just kind of conclude by saying, as a council, we are doing more than our fair share. One of the things you may see a lot in news coverage is that councils are failing to meet their targets. That is the council, Exeter City Council. We will deliver. We will do it. What we are talking about here is Exeter, the city. It's huge. There are a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, and we are trying to engage them all, trying to come up with innovative schemes, innovative partnerships to collectively deliver a net zero city by 2030. Massive challenge. We are up for it. Exeter City as a whole is one for rising to challenges and delivering. And I'm really pleased to see the number of partners we already have engaged with this agenda. So I'd like to see it delivered, obviously, at the city. But I'm just making the point, I think, that as a city council, we will meet our target. We will be zero by 2030 as a city council. This is about the city as a whole. It's a massive challenge, but we are up for trying to work with all the partners within the city to try and land it. And yeah, quite a challenge, but well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. I want to actually, because this is such an important item, ask the Chief Executive if he wants to just follow up and come on with anything.
If I can, then just pick up on a few points. And I think it's important. There's been reference to individuals and the concern that they have that they're being obliged. Nobody is talking about forcing people to buy an electric vehicle, right? All we're saying is net zero means the assumption is that's where we get to. And because when policies bite, they have impacts that are very different. You have to do the equalities assessment. You have to do all the things that you would do before you introduce the measure. But a whole system approach means exactly that. You have to address both the policy framework as the individual conversations with individuals about what's their circumstances. So we all embrace all that. The point that's being made is the kind of city you want to create is not a city that continues to be congested, because there's 53,000 homes being planned over the next 20 years in this part of Devon. If we don't sort out this traffic problem, congestion gets worse. But I tell you what, nothing gets built, because if this city grinds to a halt because of congestion, there will be no consents granted outside the city, because the Highways Authority will direct refusals that you can't build houses because the road and motorway capacity can't cope with the traffic. We're not just doing this in a sense of this is net zero. What's the kind of places we're trying to create? And that's what Liverpool Exeter is designed to do. And just so we're really clear about this doesn't include the carbon emissions for the next 12,000 homes that are being planned in the city. And according to our government, you can build a house today and get consent, and then you've got to go and rip out the gas boiler because the government allows volume house builders to put gas boilers in that we've then got to retrofit because they haven't done the right thing. That's what this government is doing, because they're signed up to 2050. So what you've done by your ambition, because you've decided we want to be a net zero city, and you've also said we do the best climate science in the world here, and that's why we got a vested interest in getting this right. We got developers now who rock up to speak to Ian Collinson about building the city, and they say we are signed up to the principles of how we deliver car-free developments that are exactly as you want to say. That's about ambition and creating the right framework for having a conversation, rather than what most local government does, planners, is they hide behind the national policy and say we can't stop you doing that, so therefore fill your boots, go and do that. That's the difference. Now, I don't think many people acknowledge that and give us the credit for that. Just as if in this city, you don't build the standard houses that you build in other places. Our houses are built to a higher standard because we've had internal space standards in our local plan ahead of whatever everyone else has done. And I never hear the public or anyone say to us, well done for your planners for getting that right. Do you know that? As members, do you know that every house you build in the city is bigger than every other house of that type by the volume house builders because of your local plan policy? No one gives us credit for that. Your local plan has done that about a decade ago. We got it through the inspectorate, and they're building bigger houses as a consequence. And you've been doing that, showing leadership, and it's exactly that. So you're not saying, sorry, I got off on one, I'm sorry about that. But the point of it is, I believe in this stuff we do as a council, right? I believe in the brand. When the HRA, our officers do the retrofit, people trust the brand. When you knock on the door, you open that door, it's a council officer saying, we're going to invest installation, and they believe in it. The challenge is, how do you convince the private sector when it's not council people that turn up? And that's why the Green Deal failed. And what I'm trying to do in the city is build a brand that when we go and knock the doors and retrofit, people believe it. And you have a service from the beginning to the end, and people trust in it. And if you don't, this is not about negative, this is about cities having thousands of people employed to deliver the green agenda. That's the scale of that's why the college and all the private sector businesses in the city are now working on the green construction sector. They know the jobs that are in the pipeline. And that's what we're trying to do. Not with policies whipping people, but incentivizing the behavior. That's why we no longer have an economic development team, we've got a net zero team. That tells you where we think growth is going to happen. Sorry, I went off on it.
I'm glad you did, Cream, I'll agree. And thank you for that. So, executive, I think we got the right person leading on the net zero, haven't we? Good. I'm glad that's not in the recommendations, but I'm glad we recognise it. And also, leading by example is Cream, who doesn't have a car and risks public transport. And I've got to say, I went to an appointment outside, just on the edge of Exeter today. My bus was on time in both directions. And I'm using a bus more often than my electric bike now, only because I'm part of that privileged few that can get travel. But anyway, so I've got these recommendations, these 6 recommendations before us. Can I have a seconder for the recommendations, please? I'll go with Councillor Parkhurst on this occasion. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show.
Unanimous vote in favour.
Thank you. And now we're going to turn to the next few exciting items of the agenda, Michelle. The ones that we've really come here to listen to this evening. And item 7 is, of course, well, these are what makes the council tick. If we don't have these right, we don't tick to do anything. And it is the General Fund Capital Monitoring and Revised Capital Programme for 22-23 and future years. And there is an additional recommendation. Have you got the additional one up there? No? Wow. So there's an additional recommendation to go to. Those are the 2 recommendations. The additional one is that the additional scheme for the skate ramp and BMX jumps at Pinnow Station Road playing field of £49,280 be added to the capital programme. You'll give us the reasons for this, but just to say, as Councillor Wood has quite rightly pointed out, these were already in the 106 arrangements, so there's no preferential treatment going on here for Pinhoe. So those are the 3 recommendations. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the performance of the Council's capital programme during the last financial year and to seek member approval for the amendments and for further funding requests for the Council's capital programme for 22-23. So as the Chair pointed out, we are bringing forward an additional recommendation for the £49,280 capital budget for a skate ramp and BMX jump at Pinhoe Station Road playing field. It's been brought forward so that it's not delayed until October for council approval. And to give some more background to that request, which I'll read out, it says, to create the new play area at the site, an existing skate ramp was dismantled and installed in the Belle Isle depot for reuse. This skate ramp was a popular facility, even given its small size, so we plan to reinstate the ramp at the eastern end of the playing field. The ramp will be widened to allow it to be better used and to improve safety for users. Additionally, the existing BMX jumps on the site have been allowed to degrade and become significantly overgrown, meaning that they are now unusable. We plan to level the existing ramps and create a new track similar to the one recently built in Hertfordshire Park. So that's the background to the additional recommendation. In terms of the key headlines of the report, the council spent £17 million against its 72.3 revised capital programme, resulting in 55 million seeking to be brought forward, which most notably includes 44 million for commercial property purchases, which includes the Guildhall Shopping Centre that completed in May this year. So in addition to this request, the Chief Finance Officer, who unfortunately can't be here this evening, asked me to draw attention to their Section 151 officer comments on page 18 that really cover the key financial points to bring to your attention. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. Councillor Jobson, do you want to ask anything on this one? No? Okay. Do I have any questions? Any comments? Councillor Wood?
Thank you, Chair. Just because we keep returning to the subject that's dear to my heart, just kind of pointing out the number of capital investments we are making in climate change and reducing emissions. We've got the recycling containers being invested in, MRF enhancements. I was down at the recycling centre last week, and the work that's going down there, processing our recycling for the city is amazing. That's fine. The innovative work they are doing is well worth a note. We close Riverside, the lane markers there, very old, very hard plastic. Normally you can't do anything with that. It's rubbish. It will go into landfill or go into waste to energy reclamation. It's being granulated. There's a machine down there that breaks it into small particles. Those small particles can then be made into kayaks, bins. There's no end of things that can be made from it. So it's that innovation that I think is great. Now that's what our MRF does, and it's on this list to be enhanced. We've got the solar farm, we've got the roof on the Riverside, which I mentioned, and will also have a solar array in it. I could go on and on. I just think it's important to note that even at this level, when we're looking at the different projects that we are clearly agreeing to invest in, it's already there.
Thank you, Councillor Wood. Anybody else want to come in? I would just draw your attention to page 86 to 87, 8.7, the achievement, energy saving projects, bin infrastructure, parks infrastructure, anti-intrusion measures. However, we would all say no matter how much we do, they still get breached. Just referring to a topical issue there. But it is important, just goes to show what we are actually doing within the city that needs to be celebrated. So we got those two recommendations plus the additional recommendation. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Pearce. All those in favour?
Unanimous vote in favour with the amendment, Chair.
Thank you, Howard. So we now move on to agenda item 8, which is the overview of the general fund revenue budget. There are 7 recommendations there which are up before you. And Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So again, this report sets out the financial position of the general fund revenue budgets, which are those funded in part by the council tax, at the end of the financial year 21-22, following the recent closure of the accounts. Once again, the Chief Finance Officer has asked me to draw attention to Section 151 officer comments on page 104, which again cover the key financial points to bring to your attention, and happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have any contributions? Councillor Jobson? No, not on this one. Okay. If you've got no contributions, I'll put those 7 recommendations. I'll move them from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Williams. All those in favour, please show.
Unanimous vote in favour, Chair.
Thank you very much, Howard. Item 9, the 21-22 HRA Budget Monitoring Report. I turn Councillor Denning, your 3 recommendations, please.
Okay, it is recommended that the executive note the report and council notes and approves where applicable the supplementary budgets of £550,000 and £500 as detailed in paragraph 85. The HRA financial position for the 2021/22 financial year and the revision of the HRA capital programme to reflect the reported variations detailed in Appendix 4.
Thank you. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Denning. So again, this report sets out the financial position of the housing revenue account, which is the ring-fenced account for the council's housing stock at the end of the 21/22 financial year for both its revenue and capital budgets. This report was presented to the Council Housing Advisory Board on the 21st of June, and I once again draw your attention to the section 151 officer comments on page 126, which again cover the key points to draw to members' attention, and happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Michelle. Do we have any questions? Anne, sorry, Councillor Jobson, anybody else? Questions or contributions? If not, I'll move those from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Devin. I feel like I'm at an auction house, everybody. Councillor Devin, sold. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Thank you very much, Howard. We move on to item 10 now, and this is whereby that we are asking ourselves, and then obviously the paper goes to council, to note the content of the report. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a statutory report setting out the council's performance against its treasury management strategy, which members would have approved at the start of the financial year. Again, section 151 officer comments are set out on page 151, which draws your attention to the key financial risks relating to borrowing costs due to interest rate rises. Again, happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I know Councillor Jobson wants to make a contribution and maybe ask a question within that contribution. Councillor Jobson.
Thank you. It was really an inquiry about the fixed term deposits chart on page 155. All of the ones listed seem to have a maturity date that has passed. I just wondered what the current position was, or whether it could be updated.
Well, just to say on that particular one, I have been given a list of all the dates. I'm not proposing to read them out, but we will make sure you get a copy of those and they appear attached to the minutes.
If they could, then they'd be the full council, which I think.
Well, they will be in the minutes of the executive, which will be approved by the full council. Any contributions or comments on this paper? No? Okay, well, we're asked to note it. Can I have I'll move it from the chair. A seconder, please. Who's up for Councillor Hussain was there first. All those in favour? Thank you very much, Howard. Move on now to item 11. We're cracking on now. Implications of the Elections Act. Well, all I would say to this is, I'm not sure when this is going to come, but we ain't got a Chancellor of the Exchequer at the moment, and we haven't got, is it a Health Secretary at the moment? So, you know, we could be doing something. There's a vacancy there, Councillor Jobson. Anyway, and you're not having Dave Hodson, by the way. So we've got these recommendations, John, and a paper that you very good set out, which are, again, I will praise you and Jeff Chalk for bringing it forward, very informative, and I'll ask you to talk to the recommendations, please, John.
Thank you, Leader, and I was going to say that it seems quite apt, speaking about this evening, on what's happening in Whitehall, but We'd have to plan for things coming ahead. The Elections Act received its royal assent in April of this year and has, as the report starting on page 367 in the appendix shows, has major implications for the running of elections as well as for the electoral registration. I will say though that what we have put out in the report is the worst case scenario. We are trying to attempt the worst case for it, worst case as in our position, and obviously we're trying to make some assumptions as to the level of take-up in some of these issues as well, particularly like voter ID. But and I will say that whilst some of the cost implications are quite startling if you look at them over a period of time, the government have said that these changes will be funded, but have not as yet said when that will be, or when that potential level of funding will be, and that's contained within the Section 151 officers' comments. But we can't sit back and wait for that funding to come through. We have to get on with the implications of it. As we sit here at the moment, some of those are starting December of this year, most notably the voter ID requirements, so we have to start planning for it now, because there is quite a lot of work to be done on that. But I have got an update since the report was presented, in that it's, whilst, as I say, in here it looked like myself as the electoral registration officer would need to be producing those voter ID cards going forward, it may well be that those voter ID cards will be produced by a central point, maybe through the Department for Levelling Up Community Housing and Communities. But so that may take away some of the cost implications, but all the work behind it will still need to be done by the electoral registration staff, and that needs to be planned for now. And also, one of the biggest unknowns at the moment is when we actually get into the polling stations in May of next year with the voter ID requirements, the impact that will have on throughput of voters through the polling station, the time that it may well take, the challenges that there will be for the staff that are in there, together with the challenges that are being made to the voters if they haven't got a voter ID, and all the implications that you see in the report as well. To that extent, we think that could be quite substantial, so we are currently planning for an additional member of staff to go into each of the polling stations to help cover that. And as I say now, sitting here at the moment, May elections next year are, I always use this phrase, relatively straightforward, because they are planned to just be city council elections. So it could be a good one to get your teeth into actually running the new processes. That is the major implication that I'm worried about going forward and needs to start work now. So whilst we anticipate some government funding coming forward, I have to plan that I'm not going to get it. It's certainly not in time to start the resource requirements. So the recommendations are that a provisional sum be made put forward of up to £50,000 for the current financial year, which would include some resource implications, resource staffing to go into the actual team itself to deliver what's being required of us. More than happy to try and answer any questions, Leader.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. And indeed, Councillor Moore has asked a question, and if that item is not picked up within the content of it, then we'll make sure she gets an answer to us. So Councillor Hussain and then Councillor Parkhouse.
I just wanted to ask if there's any implication to, sorry, I forgot the word, the ones that vote by card at home? Postal vote, yes. Is there any application for postal vote? Although I vote with postal votes. I forgot the word. Is there any implication for that?
Not with regards to voter ID, because they already have to produce the voter ID. You know, voter ID, your signature and date of birth.
Oh.
But there will be a further implication further down the line that the refresher of those voter IDs for postal votes needs to be done on a more frequent basis. It will be 3 years rather than 5 years. So that whilst it might seem it spreads it out a little quicker, it actually condenses it to start off with, because you've got a large number to do in the first year and then every 3 years after that. So voter ID, no, because it's already there, but there will be some requirements for all voters who don't buy postal votes to do it on to refresh on a more regular basis.
Thank you. Councillor Parkhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm pretty dismayed at these measures that are being implemented by central government. I stood personally in one of the elections that was in Bromley, which was the rollout of these tests of voter ID, and in both of the voter ID test pilots it was shown that about 1,000 people were turned away. They came without ID, they were turned away and they didn't come back. So we know in local elections every vote matters, and I think we'll see for ourselves that this this isn't a great programme, and will just lead to more disenfranchisement of very vulnerable populations, those who don't have ID to drive, those who don't have ID to go abroad. They're less likely to have the capacity to go to local government or central government to get these new forms of ID. So yeah, I think I'm really upset that this is something that we have to implement. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Well, thank you, Chair. I also share Councillor Parkhouse's concerns about the effect it's going to have on democracy in across the whole country. My question is actually about, John, how confident are you that we will get full funding from the government to cover our costs? And the reason I'm asking this is that of all the enormous number of extra activities and work that we had imposed on us by the government throughout COVID and with refugees, that we don't appear to be getting the full funding of what we've committed to that, and so I'm rather sceptical that we won't get it on this occasion either.
Okay, John, I'll let you come in at the end with some of these. Is that all right? Is there anybody else? No? Well, actually, John, I've got a question for you, of which I've not given you written notice of. So, as a returning officer, your experience, because I'm assuming all this is doing, is to stop voter fraud. Stop all those people rocking up, saying they're going to vote who's not entitled to vote. Can you tell us, you've been doing it a great many years, a great deal of experience, how much, expressed as a percentage, would you say you've had to deal with within this council for all the elections that you've dealt with, voter fraud?
I'm not even sure, Leader, if I could round it up into a percentage. In the most recent times I know of, there have been 2 that I know suspected electoral fraud issues within Exeter, which I've referred to the police, and neither of them were found to be issues of electoral fraud. But that doesn't mean that we are maybe the exception. There are other areas where electoral fraud has been identified, but in my experience here, that's the numbers. Okay. To answer Councillor Williams's question, as the Section 151 officer says, there is a, quote the phrase, I think it is a new burden agreement between central and local government, whereby the government promise to fully fund burdens on the sector. You can see that I've asked for an additional financial contribution to be made by this council to cover those costs. I've got to sit here and say I'm not going to doubt that the government will produce that money, but it's when. And if I've got implications to start producing things from December of this year, I need to start spending money now, which isn't in the current budget. So that's why there's additional requirement for the funding to be made available.
So, I think Councillor Parkhouse, you've spoken, but I'll allow you to give a point of information.
Yeah, I looked this up because I was interested. In 2019, in the election, out of 58 million votes that were cast, there were 33 that were instances of suspected impersonation. So, as a percentage, that's 0.0001.
Well, every penny well spent on stopping all that naughty fraud. And okay, those are the recommendations before us. Something we've got to do, guys. We've got to protect ourselves, and we've got to allow John and his team the resources to do the job properly. So I'm going to move those from the chair. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Denning. All those in favour? Thank you, Howard. We move on to item 16, and this is the former bus station. And as you will see, that this is a provision of a sum of £900,000 for the purpose of funding the demolition of the former bus station. And so, Mike Carson, tell us when it's going to be knocked down, please.
That would be another misfortune, Chair. Okay, this is a report seeking funding to demolish the old bus station and move the site forward towards interim uses before the wider City Point scheme comes forward. Over the COVID period, really, officers have been reviewing various COVID recovery funding options to bring the area back into some sort of productive use. Unfortunately, none of those lines of inquiry have been successful, and now that the council itself has ceased its, largely ceased its use of the building and of the aprons, the upper and lower aprons, those uses are also coming to an end. It's increasingly difficult to justify holding off from advancing the site. So we're now bringing forward a proposal or a funding request to demolish the building and prepare the site for interim uses and subsequent redevelopment. The proposal will allow for interim uses to be brought forward in conjunction with the city centre team, Victoria's team. It will allow us to advance site preparation for the wider City Point scheme over time, and it will allow us therefore to accelerate the Little Exeter aspirations for the site. I should say that we're also submitting a bid to the government's Levelling Up Fund to fund this demolition. If successful, we can then fund this budgetary request from the award of that grant. If we're not successful, we can fund this from the surplus generated by the Guildhall Shopping Centre acquisition that was referred to earlier. That's the plan. In terms of programme, the difficulty, of course, is engaging with the construction sector, or indeed the demolition sector at the moment. We have made a generous budget aspiration, but there is the question of procurement, dealing with the bids that demolition contractors will come forward, and then the ability to actually mobilise on site. But we're hoping that if all goes well, we would hope to be moving before the winter.
Good. Thank you, Mike, for that report. Important thing there to do. Do I have any contributions, or somebody wants to ask a question on this? Councillor Gusay.
I just wanted to know if there's any special issues with the building, for example. Is there any asbestos there, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the building is basically built in asbestos, which is why it's so expensive. Extremely tricky building.
Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
I just think this is a great recommendation coming forward to see some action on a site that's now clearly sticks out as something that needs some progress on when we look around it. I'm really excited to see that there's actually going to be some interim, some meanwhile uses of the site, because we can actually, benefit from the increased footfall and the amazing connectivity of being next to the new bus station. So obviously that'll be a really popular site for whatever it's used for, while we're seeking a more longer term solution. So it won't just be an empty space attracting antisocial behaviour or any of the other challenges that just having a derelict site could bring. So really positive, really great to see this moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. If there's nobody else, I'll put that recommendation. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Wood. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, that's the end of part one. I'm now going to formally move a motion to put us into part two, as we have one report on the Guildhall Shopping Centre. Can I have a seconder for the motion to put us into part two, please? Councillor Parker, all those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Right.